Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. This time I'm going to be talking about limits, boundaries, safe words, all that stuff that is so important and is such a core building block to entering into the BDSM community. Like several of my videos that I've made recently, this is something that I have talked about in bits and pieces throughout several of my other things that I've been discussing, but it's not something I have a dedicated video on, so that is what we are doing today. This video is also partly inspired by a question that I received on Tumblr from somebody who is just starting out in BDSM, is just starting to explore their kinks, and hadn't really heard of anything yet that they would want to make a limit, and they were asking for some advice about how to know what your limits are and how to sort of establish all of that. But before we get into all of that, first, what is a limit? A limit is, generally speaking, something that you are not okay with doing. It is something that you don't want to do and you do not want to either give or receive. Now, you can have different hard and soft limits as well. Some people don't separate them, they just have limits in general, but I think, again, when you are new or you're just sort of generally inexperienced, or hell, no matter how long you've been in BDSM, I actually really like using both hard and soft limits, and that kind of breaks limits down into two further categories. A hard limit is something that you are just straight up not okay with doing, don't ask, not on the table, not up for negotiation. If a top were to do something, or if a bottom were to do something that is on your hard limits list, that would instantly call red for the scene and would not be okay, and you would probably not want to play with that person again should they violate a hard limit. Conversely, a soft limit is a little bit more difficult to define. Generally, a soft limit is going to be something that you are not sure if you want to do, you're interested in exploring, but aren't quite ready yet. It's something that you only do with certain partners, or only after very extensive negotiation, after you've known somebody for a long enough time. But it's generally something that requires a lot more in-depth talking and negotiation or specific circumstances than your everyday average kinks. So, for example, you could be really into rope bondage, but suspensions are a soft limit. So you are comfortable doing groundwork with people without a lot of extensive negotiation beforehand. But if you want to do something like an inversion or a suspension with somebody, you need to really talk about it first, go over the details before you actually proceed with doing that kind of scene. It can be somewhat difficult when you're new to really know where your limits are and what your real kinks are, because when you're new, most of your experience is going to be things that you've seen online or heard about other people doing, and so naturally you are going to see things that seem really hot but maybe aren't really for you when you actually go out and do them, and you're not going to really be able to know until you go out and experience them. That's not to say you shouldn't have a list of limits or a list of things that you're not okay with. I think it's really important when you're first getting started to really do a lot of thinking on yourself, thinking about what motivates you to be part of BDSM, and be conservative with your limits. Don't worry about being boring to a top. Don't worry about seeming like you're not adventurous or whatever. It's not a competition. It's not the goal. You're not here to impress anybody. What you should do is take little baby steps. Take little baby steps, everybody, into exploring whatever it is that you really, really want to explore before you actually jump off the deep end. So, for example, if you are really interested in impact play, maybe you shouldn't start out with whips. Maybe have whips on your soft limits list. Start out with spanking and small paddles and things, that don't tend to accidentally draw blood, because if you're dealing with somebody who's maybe not experienced with whips and you are not an experienced whip bottom yourself, you may accidentally find yourself in a situation where the top could draw blood, which presumably is a hard limit for you, although, again, some people it's not. I think a lot of people assume, especially when they're new, there's things that are obviously hard limits without specifying what they are. Keep in mind, guys, we're living in a kinky world. This is BDSM. People are into weird things, and if you don't specify that you're not into them and you're playing with a new person, you don't need to go through every single fetish ever, but something like, say, having an arm chopped off. There are people who are into that, both having their arms chopped off and, chopping off other people's arms. It's not that common, but you should probably have permanent mutilation and scarification on your hard limits list unless you really, really know that person well and you really, really know it's what you want. Again, having something like a branding or a scarring done can seem super hot, but I would not recommend it unless, again, really know that person and you really know what you're doing and you have more experience as a bottom. As you start exploring things, as you start really figuring out what your kinks are, what really motivates you to be in BDSM, you can totally change these. Limits are not something that needs to stay the same throughout all of time. So, for example, for me, for the first 2, 3 almost years, I was exploring kink. Anything with needles and blood was a complete hard limit for me. I could not do it. Then I met my current partner, and then that became a soft limit because I knew that he had experience with it. I had started to read about it more. There were elements of it that really piqued my interest and that felt more comfortable in this particular relationship than I had felt in previous relationships. And then eventually it has stayed as a soft limit, but it's something that I'm more open to doing more often than I would have been, say, 6 months to a year ago. You can also have things that aren't limits that become limits. You can have things that are soft limits become hard limits become soft limits, etc., etc., etc. BDSM is not meant to be completely engraved in stone, especially when it comes to your personal preferences. You may also, in fact, experience changes in your physical circumstances, be that a chronic illness, some other kind of situation that may impede you from doing activities that you once really super enjoyed, but because of your physical limitations you can no longer do, and they are now hard limits. Something that goes really closely with limits is boundaries. I would think of limits tend to be more applied to things specific to scenes and specific BDSM activities. So, for example, things like needle play, knife play, gun play, kidnapping, rape, whatever, all of that stuff, those are things that would generally be considered limits. They can also be boundaries. I think boundaries more apply to a DS relationship as a whole. So not just the physical elements, not just the strictly like scene BDSM elements, but also the mental and emotional aspects. So, for example, you could have a boundary, which again, very much like limit, is something that you do not want to have pressed, something that you do not want to do, something you're not interested in negotiating for even. So you could have a boundary around for not being degraded. And degradation and humiliation can be a scene, but I mean more by that, like, you don't want to be called somebody's slut, you don't want to be called somebody's whore, be that in a scene, or anytime during a relationship, like out at a party, something like that. You do not want to have your name referred to as, you're my whore, you're a slut, whatever. You don't want to have those words called in reference to you. So that could be a boundary. Again, boundaries tend to be more emotional, mental things, and they definitely also include the physical. I think limits tend to be more exclusively towards physical, actual elements of BDSM. Again, before you start playing with somebody, before you enter a DS relationship with somebody, make sure you do talk about your limits and your boundaries, as well as the things that you both find super hot and interesting, and things that you want to try together. Very important, and I'm going to repeat this again. Don't worry about looking boring. Don't worry about not being adventurous enough. That's not what kink is about. It's about staying safe and staying where you are comfortable. You can always explore more later, but take baby steps. Now, if you're in a scene, you should have a way to communicate with your partner what is going on and how you feel. That is where safe words come in. Safe words and limits, I think personally, are the two most important things that you need to know about, along with aftercare, when you're first getting started in BDSM. What a safe word is basically a way to communicate with the top or communicate with the bottom, whoever the opposite party is, in that particular scene, how you're doing. Generally, there are 3 stages. This is sort of the classical model of safe words, let's call it, and it's green, yellow, and red. Generally, especially when you are first playing with somebody, it'll ask you to check in, and then you'll say something like green, or whatever you have established your green word to be. Some people don't use colors, they use other words. I personally prefer colors when I'm playing with new people because it's a very universally understood system. You don't have to worry about remembering some other new word. So green normally means doing good, keep doing what you're doing, push on. And yellow can mean several different things. It can mean check in with me. It could mean slow down. It could mean change your location, change what you're doing. It could mean like I need to talk to you about something. It means I need water, I need to go to the bathroom. It could mean any number of things, and generally what I prefer to have happen if I call yellow or the scene is just yellowed out in general is to have my partner check in with me and like physically ask me if possible what needs to go on. It's generally something for me where like yellow is not a clear stop or a clear go. It's something that can have a lot of different meanings. If you're in a situation, and I'll get more into this later, where you may not be able to speak, let's say you're wearing a gag, you have a hood on that kind of muffles your speech. You want to remove that so you can talk with your partner about what's going on, and hopefully whatever it is will be fixed, will be moved. You'll be able to get water, use the restroom, whatever, and then like go back to whatever your scene is. Red is 100% no, stop, end scene. It is the emergency brake on the scene. So if you want to make a further car analogy, green is either going to be acceleration or just keep going at your same speed. Yellow is going to be kind of tapping on the brakes or gently slowing down. Red is going to be stop on the brakes, pull the emergency brake, that kind of thing. It should 100% stop a scene. There should never be a time unless you are the kind of person who has negotiated for it beforehand, and red is not your real red safe word, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But red should mean 100% stop, no questions asked. If you're in a suspension, you get taken down from the suspension. If you're hogtied, you get put out of the hog tie. The scene does not continue unless you specifically ask at a later point to continue the scene, but you need to make sure whatever is wrong gets taken care of. You should never feel any guilt or any undue pressure to use or not use red as your safe word. It is there for a reason. If you are playing at a party, usually at private dungeons, or also at like if you're playing at like a kinky friend's house and they're having like a BDSM party there, red, yellow, green is generally considered the house safe word. So if somebody says red, a DM will also check in to make sure that everybody is being taken care of appropriately, just to make sure that, you know, everything's on the up and up and everybody is feeling good about themselves. Like I said earlier, some people don't use red, yellow, and green. They have other words that they have used within their own personal DS relationship or their own top-bottom relationship, whatever it is. I personally do like sticking with red, yellow, green because it is something that is universally understood, but some people like to have specific words that won't come up in their scenes. If you are doing a scene where you are wearing a gag, you have a hood over your face, something that impairs your speech or ability to communicate, you do need to make a backup. So, for example, I will, you know, if I am being choked or my voice is being restricted, I will tap twice somewhere, like either on my own body or on my partner's body. If I am in a hog tie and I'm facing the opposite direction, I have a gag in, I will like flash two fingers like this, and that means check in. It's a little bit more difficult to get the nuance of red, yellow, green without having the verbal component. So, for example, if I needed to use yellow, I would do the tap, whereas if I need to do red, I would do like a fist, or if I need to do this would be like yellow, and then like this would be red, for example. It's just one way you could do it. Some people like to use like really long words for their safe words, and for me, I don't personally do that because if you are panicking and you do need to call red, and your brain is going, ah, and it's like freaking out, chances are you're not going to remember what that long word is because it's something that you don't normally use in your everyday life, something that would come up in the scene. So your brain is like, oh my god, what's the word? I don't remember what it is. And you'll just freak out and not be able to remember it. And then things will continue and get worse. And just don't do that. If you do forget what your safe word is, if you haven't, you know, specified it, you should come up with some sort of alternative. Some people I know will play with red and they'll like call red during the scene but not really mean red. They have a secret other word that they use which is not red that they will use to actually stop the scene. That is definitely more in the advanced play category, just because it can be a bit mindfucky to do that, and not something that I personally do, but it is an option if you're that kind of person and you like saying no, stop, red, blah, 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 to try and be a brat, or to try and, you know, establish the lack of power that you have in that scene and then secretly have another word that you use to really stop the scene or just some other signal. But yeah, that's basically what it is. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. Do you think limits, boundaries, etc. are really, really important? So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave that down below in the comment section, as well as any video suggestions, stories, etc. I always love reading all of your comments. You guys are so great. If you want to find my social media, you can do so down below in the description box. I have an Instagram, I have a Tumblr, I have a Patreon. If you want to support this channel and see more great content, you can find that link down below as well. Until next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.